Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm George Frampton, a distinguished senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center, and I'm introducing today's discussion on the role of climate infrastructure investments in Appalachia. Before we get started, a little housekeeping. This event is on the record. We are live streaming to Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. We encourage you to post about today's discussion and share on social media using the hashtag AC Energy and tagging us at AC Global Energy. So we're excited to host this conversation with a esteemed group of panelists who bring a variety of perspectives from their life and work in the region. For the past half century, Appalachia has powered much of the economic prosperity of this country through its coal resources and its coal mining workforce. But now, as we go through a major national and global energy transition and coal production continues to decline, many Appalachian communities are left to discover alternative drivers for local economic prosperity. A crucial element to this need for regional modernization is the deployment of climate-friendly infrastructure that can produce employment opportunities, repair the environment, create public goods. We hope that today's conversation can provide a little bit of insight into the kinds of infrastructure investments that could actually improve the economy and quality of life in the region, of federal policy mechanisms that are necessary to ensure pathways to high-quality union jobs. Its unique features should result in this region figuring centrally within all of the negotiations over federal infrastructure investment that are going to begin to occur immediately. Before I hand it off to Jim Lyon to introduce our virtual panel, however, I want to take a moment to honor the late Linda Lance. Linda was a lifelong, tireless advocate for public lands and the environment, all the while remaining deeply committed to her other passions: her dog, her community, her travels, her friends, family, her husband, Kirk, and her colleagues. It was because of Linda that a relationship between the Partnership for Responsible Growth and National Wildlife Federation, and now at the Atlantic Council, first began to encourage national organizations to reach out more aggressively to local leaders and local organizations in Appalachia to identify the opportunities for challenges, to help make sure that it's the local people who are included fully in any national debate about national policy. Linda recently passed away after a long battle with cancer, throughout which she remained steadfastly thoughtful, optimistic, and committed. Her intelligence, her kindness, and her warmth is missed in this work and in our daily lives. I worked with Linda throughout the years at Council on Environmental Quality, at the Wilderness Society, and at the Partnership, and we hope to honor her through our continued commitment to this body of work. Hopefully, we can be as thoughtful as she always was in our approach to policymaking, in our jobs, and in our day-to-day lives. I'm not going to ask Jim Lyon, who's Vice President of Conservation Policy at National Wildlife Federation, to introduce our panel and moderate our conversation today. Jim, over to you.
Thank you, George, and thank you, Kelsey, and the Atlantic Council for providing us this forum. And thanks for your words about Linda. I knew and worked with her for many years, and she was an extraordinary person. One of the things that stood out for me is her commitment and humble compassion for the people of the coal country. So it's pretty fitting that we have this program to honor her today. The nation is facing a moment of tremendous change and challenges. We're not yet out of the pandemic that so disrupted our economy. We have a growing reckoning with the realities facing the changing climate, our existential need to accelerate greenhouse gas reductions and enact resiliency solutions. Energy markets are rapidly changing, particularly as the nation moves away from coal and fossil fuel to cleaner energies and efficient technologies. And while all the nation has been affected by these factors, regional economies historically built around coal and fossil fuels are facing some of the greatest economic, social, and environmental impacts, such as Appalachia. Hard times are not new to Appalachia, where chronic unemployment, economic downturns, pollution-ravaged landscapes, and more recently, the opioid epidemic has been cruelly disproportionate, and where federal investments always seem to go elsewhere in greater share. But there's a regional rebirth of the spirit to chart a different course, in a sense that the time is now. It's about forging a new economic trajectory for Appalachia that's different than relying on the old 20th century model. That model where too often the region's wealth was taken away by absentee corporations, and after the resource was spent, the workforce and communities were cast aside. People are calling for a new vision that embraces the values and the strength of the people of the region and invests in them to build a sustainable future. And like elsewhere, the Appalachian infrastructure needs serious targeted investment. Modernize the grid, fix water systems, modernize clean transportation, continue the expansion of clean energy, create a foundation for new modern industries, and put people back to work doing that stuff, including repairing the damage to its lands from abandoned mines, orphan gas wells, crumbling brownfields. And this vision should not overlook Appalachia's natural treasures, its forests, its mountains, its abundant streams and rivers. National Wildlife Federation has worked in this region for most of our 80-year history. And what's often overlooked is its incredible inherent wealth. The Greater Appalachian Forest is one of the most diverse regions anywhere in North America. And restoring and enhancing those natural systems and their ability to absorb carbon can restore the vitality of communities that live there. Now, as Congress and the Biden administration are bringing fresh energy to the call for significant investments in the nation's infrastructure and accelerated actions on climate change, groups like the Reimagine Appalachia campaign are calling for a robust Appalachian climate infrastructure plan that comprehensively targets this region. What is to be done is very important, but it also must work for all the people in the region. The public dollars must be targeted to support families sustaining wages and unionized jobs. And investment programs must provide pathways into the careers for workers that have been previously left out, including Black workers, women, people returning to society after serving correctional sentences. Our program speakers today work in Appalachia. 3 are part of the Reimagine Appalachia campaign, and 1 is a regional labor leader. I'll introduce all of them in the order that they will speak. More background is available through the Atlantic Council program. And each will speak for about 4 or 5 minutes. And after we hear from all, we'll move to the question and answers, and you can post those in the Zoom. Our first speaker is Hannah Halbert, Executive Director, Policy Matters Ohio, founding organization of Reimagine Appalachia. She grew up in Kentucky. She knows that region pretty well. And she will briefly also present an overview of the Appalachian Climate Infrastructure Plan. Our second speaker is Rick Bloomingdale, President of the Pennsylvania AFL-CIO. The campaign has listened closely to Rick and other union members to craft solutions that can work for labor. Rick will speak about the importance of policy mechanism encouraging unionization and pathways to good union jobs. Our third speaker is Bishop Marcia Dinkins, who's with Ohioans for Sustainable Change and also with Black Women Rising. She has worked in so many ways with so many people for so many years for economic and environmental justice and for those in society who are often left behind. And she'll speak to the deeper steps that are needed to ensure that the benefits of public investment reach the people that are most often absent from the policymaking table. And finally, Angie Rosser, who is Executive Director of the West Virginia Rivers Coalition. Angie is well-versed in what it means to work in a state that has been so deeply tied to coal mining and so deeply devastated by its collapse. Angie will speak about the public health and economic benefits of just putting people back to work, especially to be reclaiming and remediating the damage to the land. So let us turn now to our first speaker, Hannah.
All right, thank you, Jim. Thank you to our hosts. Thanks to the other panelists. To all the folks who have joined, I'm seeing that number of participants tick up. It's so encouraging and exciting. to see the interest in our little old project and in Appalachia. So thank you to you all. I'm Hannah. Again, as Jim mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of Policy Matters Ohio. Now that's a statewide think tank, and we have offices in Cleveland and here in Columbus. So some of you on the in the audience today may be already thinking skeptically, what does this organization in Cleveland or Columbus, what do they have to do with Appalachia? Why should they care? And you may have also picked up maybe by my accent that I may live in Columbus, but my home really is Eastern Kentucky and Appalachia. And so the work that I do in my daily life and sort of how I've even oriented to the world has been driven by my experience of growing up in Appalachia, seeing the inequality, the sacrifices that my family and others in the community made, the worry of making sure, you know, dad comes home intact and safe, and then seeing how little was left for our community, how little investment, how little support, and all of the other things that were being said about me and my community growing up, whether it was, you know, do you have shoes? Do you drink Mountain Dew in bottles? Do you, all of these sort of popular misconceptions about who we are, all were sort of swirling around in my brain growing up, and really led me on this path to the work that I found, to the home that I found at Policy Matters Ohio, where our mission is to create a more equitable, inclusive, vibrant, and sustainable Ohio. And so to do that, we have to care about people like me, people who are growing up in Appalachia. And frankly, as a policy community, as people who are interested in shaping a more just future, we have to start responding to these communities that have really propelled the American economy for decades while absorbing so much of the injustice of that American economy, whether those communities are in Appalachia or Cleveland or Mississippi. We have to start responding to them differently. We have to make real public investment that's guided by community principles and priorities. And that is the framework that we approach, that's the mindset that we approach this Reimagine Appalachia project with. And so over a year or so, a year plus of time, folks have been having focus group listening sessions, blueprint reviews, and even some research from policy experts across the region. We've compiled that and we've learned several things. We've learned that people want to see public investments that build the regional economy from the ground up, that support good jobs, that allow for collective bargaining, investments that ensure real opportunities for workers who have lost jobs through the extraction industries, investments that bring up the bottom, bring up the floor, bring up that low wage segment of the workforce, and put people on a path into career family sustaining jobs. Now, right before this call, I did check and see what was the most prevalent job ad for Southeast Ohio. So where are the jobs that we're seeing now? And it's still the Dollar General, the #1 employer on the OhioMeansJobs.com website, right? So we've got to treat those low wage jobs as jobs that matter. And fourth, we want to see public input and oversight of federal investments by those local communities. Now, those were the big values. And the way that we're kind of operationalizing that is through 6 various projects. This is our blueprint. 1, how do we go forward? Well, we got to start by repairing the damage of the past. Plug orphan oil and gas wells, reclaim abandoned mine lands, repair dams and levees, repair gas leaks in pipelines. That protects the communities that surround those spaces and puts people back to work in the kinds of jobs that they're already skilled to do. Second, we need to modernize the electrical grid. Universal broadband is now being broadly accepted as necessary infrastructure. Grow clean, efficient manufacturing by repurposing coal plants for energy efficient manufacturing hubs. Build a more sustainable transportation system. That means including this region in conversations about public transit expansions and upgrades and electric vehicle infrastructure. And finally, relaunch the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps. And this is something that has got a lot of energy and a lot of interest from folks all over the region and in DC, I think. There's so much that can be done just by restoring forests, waterways, repairing the damages to lands. And that restoration creates good jobs in tow. So it's a big package, it's a big vision. We're talking about 23 plus billion in investment needed across several states, but there's a big return, more than 500,000 jobs. The Reimagine Appalachia Blueprint really is a vision for a 21st century sustainable Appalachia. The plan shows policymakers how to achieve that vision with investments in a clean economic future that puts workers first, that puts our communities first, that respects and takes care of the land, and ultimately grows local wealth. So I hope as folks learn more about the project, they really do see this as a different approach that's connected to community values, to the community priorities, and see those voices of Appalachians in the blueprint and in the conversation that we're going to have today. Jim?
Yes, thank you very much, Hannah, for the overview. We're going to turn now to Rick Bloomingdale, the Pennsylvania AFL-CIO. Rick?
Thank you very much, Jim, and it's my pleasure to address thank you to the Atlantic Council for putting this webinar together today and talking to all these participants. And, you know, one of the things that we really like about what Reimagine Appalachia has done is the focus on the workers, that it hasn't just been about, you know, oh, we got to clean up Appalachia, right? It's about the focus on the people who live there. That's what makes it so vibrant and such a good policy plan, because it's talking to people locally about what they need, not a bunch of experts from Washington or Harrisburg or Charleston, but people who live in the region, although Charleston's in the region, but talking to folks who actually live in the region about what it is they need. And what we hear all the time is good jobs, clean environment. They want to be healthy where they live and work. So the work that's being done here, and one of the best ways to get a good paying job is to have a union job. And, you know, I noticed in the New York Times today that they were talking about, they were dissecting the Amazon loss for unions in Bessemer, Alabama, named after the guy who invented the Bessemer blast furnace, which, you know, what they failed to mention in that article was that Amazon's warehouse now sits on the site of where there was a big US steel mill there, and it has long since gone and provided good family sustaining jobs in Bessemer, Alabama. Now, Amazon's bragging about their $15 an hour jobs and how that's such double the federal minimum wage. But what they never talk about is the fact that those union jobs 10, 15 years ago when they disappeared were paying $35 an hour. And what was the difference? They were union steelworker jobs, even in right to work Alabama. So the key to really growing a middle class is to make sure that jobs are union jobs. Even a dollar store job can be a good paying job if it's a union job. That's what collective bargaining is all about. So we have to level the playing field. And of course, one of the ways to do that, the US House of Representatives has passed the PRO Act, the Protect Our Right to Organize Act, and it now sits in the United States Senate. We have to make sure that the PRO Act passes, because what it does is level the playing field so that companies like Amazon or Dollar General can't use captive audiences, can't illegally fire workers, which they do because the fines are just so minimal that it's cheaper to fight it in court than it is to let the union come in. And just imagine that, and I just will digress for a minute. Imagine that a US election was held like a union election, right? You'd only have one person on the debate stage. In the case of a union election, it's the company and their captive audience meetings. Unions are relegated to standing outside and handing out flyers. So say you had a political election, right? One candidate would get the stage, the other candidate would be standing out there handing out his or her flyers. Also, you know, when the company doesn't like the direction of the campaign, they can change the election date. Now, in America, of course, we have an election date, first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. It's set. That's when the election is going to be. And also, the company can decide or try to decide, it depends on the National Labor Relations Board, which is better now than it was 6 months ago, but they can decide who votes. They can expand it to include managers and supervisors, which was Amazon was trying to do to get people to vote their way. And of course, we know that they sometimes try to do that in America, determine who votes, right, by restrictive voter registration laws. But those are the big differences. And that's why we're working so hard to pass the PRO Act, to level the playing field so that unions, we don't want to tell workers that they have to join a union. We want workers to know the benefits of joining a union, and they'll make that decision themselves because American workers are some of the hardest working, smartest workers in the country. And we would stand by their decision if they were given a fair opportunity to organize. And just, you know, one of the things that we're also obviously thrilled to see is that, you know, President Biden's infrastructure plan has included a large part of some of the ideas and recommendations of Reimagine Appalachia. And, you know, some of those they've just, I don't know if it's on their website yet or not, but they just put out a state-by-state breakdown of the benefits of the Biden infrastructure plan. And the stuff is in there, and you know, is just remarkable. Money for cleaning up, as Hannah mentioned, right? Orphan gas wells, and that just aren't being used anymore. And you know, our infrastructure for not just roads and bridges. And you know, some folks who are opposed have said, "Well, let's just do roads and bridges," but infrastructure is bigger than that. It's now, as we've seen from the pandemic, it's broadband. Why should our children in rural areas that don't have access to quality broadband not be able to do online learning when schools had to shut down because of the pandemic? Why can't they turn their homework assignments in because they have to go to the local library to use the broadband? Why isn't broadband available in southwestern PA as well as it is in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh? That's what we have to do. And President Biden's plan calls for a large investment in broadband. And if it's done union, obviously that's going to provide a lot of good union jobs to install that broadband, maintain that broadband, and grow that broadband. And it also, one of the things, you know, we talk about building infrastructure, that's going to be building trades jobs. And our men and women do some of the best construction in the world. All you have to do is look at Pittsburgh and the PNC Tower that was built 2 years ago, that's platinum LEED certified. One of the cleanest, most environmentally friendly buildings in the world. And it was all built 100% union. Now, one of the issues that has come up recently, and I learned from President McGarvey, who's the president of the National North American Building and Construction Trades, the National Building Trades Union. President McGarvey talked about as they recruit more women into the trades to earn those good union paying jobs, one of the issues they're starting to have to deal with that wasn't an issue is childcare. So if you're talking about infrastructure, you also have to talk about how do we make sure that people can get to work. So President Biden's investment in childcare, and it's not just the trades, right? It's every job that we're talking about in Reimagine Appalachia, making sure that parents have access to good childcare so they can go to work without having to worry about whether their kids are safe at home. So there's just so much good stuff that Reimagine has done. And, we have, in having the seat at the table, having labor there to talk about workers' needs in the collective bargaining process and being able to grow unions, because that truly is the path to the middle class. If you saw it in the 50s and 60s, when unions had 30 to 35% of the workforce was unionized, is when we saw the big growth in the middle class. And because it was a union middle class, we were bargaining at the table for good jobs and good wages. But we also then fought for health and safety rights, not just on the union work sites, but OSHA passed. We saw the passage of the Clean Water and Clean Air Acts in the 70s when we had high union participation, because we wanted to be working in healthy and safe environments. So we can get back to that if we make the investments and work together. And that's why Reimagine is such an interesting coalition of environmentalists and labor who are, look, we don't agree on everything, but we can find common ground to lift up both labor and the environment. Thank you so much for listening, and I'm here to answer questions as we wrap up. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Rick, and thank you for your continued guidance. And for those, as we're moving through the speakers, if people want to be thinking about their questions and post them for at the end, please use the question feature. Next, we're going to turn to Bishop Dinkins. Marcia.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you, George, and the Atlantic Council for making space for this conversation. As Jim said, my name is Bishop Marcia Dinkins. I am the Executive Director for Ohioans for Sustainable Change, as well as Black Women Rising. My work is at the intersection of racial justice, as well as looking at how do we put our faith into action to ensure that those voices that are absent are really at the decision-making table. I've been working with Reimagine Appalachia, I guess, probably for the last 8 or 9 months. And one of the things that I've always pushed was narrative. And so as I walk alongside Reimagine Appalachia, one of the things that I am working on is to ensure that public investments are equitably distributed within communities of color or Black communities. And so what I'm doing now is launching the Black Appalachian Coalition. The purpose of the Black Appalachian Coalition really is to bring in those voices that are absent, that are not at the decision-making table, but consistently see degenerative policy making against them. They're targeted in ways that their voices are absent, that the policies really don't reach, policies don't include them, they're not inclusive. And so when we talk about Reimagine, or we just talk about Appalachia, period, or we mention the name rural, it's time for us to shift that narrative, because what happens is people, when they hear the word rural, they think it's just white. And so it's really a whitewash narrative. And so one of the things that we want to work towards is making sure that we have a more inclusionary narrative that speaks to both Black and white, because we can't build back better. We can't bring people along if we're not talking about those people who are not a part of the conversation. We can't bring people along if we're only having a one-sided conversation, or we're only hearing, voices sporadically. In addition to that, like in Ohio, there may not be a lot of Black people who are in Appalachia, but because this is a 4-state campaign, what we want to do is connect all of these voices together. So, the purpose is to take deeper steps, with legislators to make sure that public investments are, as I said, equitably distributed within those communities. In addition to that, it's not just about having a conversation around jobs. It's having a conversation around career opportunities. It's also dismantling, the fact that a lot of times when you think of the rural areas, their economics is prefaced on the criminal justice system, which I'm so glad that we have the CCC, which will create jobs in a more positive way. But we also have to look at the fact that the criminal justice system also speaks to the story of Appalachia or rural communities. And we want to just begin to be able to have that conversation in a whole different way. One of the things that I think Hannah mentioned was about the past, cleaning up the past. And I want to go deeper than just the conversation around water and energy and, coal and those things being the past, when the very land in Appalachia is really still having the voices of those who were there beforehand, with regards to, individuals who were subjected to slavery or Native Americans. The land is still crying out. Their blood is still crying out and asking for that justice as well. So we have to look at the whole picture of everything. And the Black Appalachian Coalition wants to look at the whole needs of Black people. So that's not just looking at jobs and broadband, but we want to look at the human structure as well as the infrastructure. Because when we look at the human structure and the infrastructure, then we can have a broader conversation. You know, one of the things that people often do, even in the, you know, in other rooms that I'm in, is we talk about all of the solutions. But one of the things we want to also talk about at the table at the Black Appalachian Coalition is how do we build revenue? Because in order for this to be successful, we have to create new revenue, but we also have to look at the revenue that we have and build off of that. And when we're able to do that, just as it was said earlier, you know, the new revenue is coming from these jobs, but we have to ensure that Black people are getting these jobs. I'm not trying to make it about a Black-white thing, because it's not, because people on the edges of rural America, as well as inside of rural America, they're experiencing the same problems. And if we're going to have a conversation about growth, we have to have this conversation where we're meeting each other at the crossroads to then begin to join hands together to bring each other along. And the only way we can bring each other along is not just looking at the current economics that we have, but it is also looking at growth. It is also about creating new jobs. It is also about bringing people forward and having their voices at the table. And so the Black Appalachian Coalition will create that table where Black people can come to a table, be at the decision-making table, speak to what their needs are, be it around the human structure or the infrastructure, so that we can create a broader narrative that not only speaks to bringing people along, but brings people along. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcia. Angie, our last speaker, and encourage people again to post some questions. We'll take them right up afterward. Angie.
Thanks, Jim. And thanks to the Atlantic Council again for hosting this dialogue. It means a great deal to be heard and be seen. I mean, this state, I live in West Virginia, this region has often felt invisible. We felt invisible, overlooked. And that invisibility has made us vulnerable to exploitation. So, so glad to be part of this discourse. And what excites me is I see, I'm feeling hopeful. Even though I live in a very rural county, Clay County, small, poor, our top employer is the Board of Education. Second is a large surface mine complex that has seen a severe decline in coal mining jobs here. So, you know, it's time to get visionary. It's time to reimagine. It's time to reinvent what the future of West Virginia and our community is going to look like. And what we have in front of us, I believe, is a win-win-win opportunity, where we are talking about meeting the climate challenge. We're talking about restoring our environment. We're talking about creating jobs immediately to help us recover out of this pandemic and economic crisis of the past year. And for a place like West Virginia, this blueprint and opportunity is a way to transform and set a new trajectory for our state, where we're not only creating new jobs now, but reinventing our economy so that these are long-term, sustaining, high-paying, good-paying jobs. We're no longer going to have to rely on the winds of a boom and bust economy. Stability, security, quality of life. And so I mentioned the timing, and it's come up about our president's American Jobs Plan, and the commitment to infrastructure is, I think, getting more attention, even in a conservative, deep red state. When you talk about things like universal broadband for communities, when you talk about infrastructure, water infrastructure, there are communities that haven't been released from a boil water advisory for 17 years. When you're talking about delivering on safe tap water, delivering on broadband, and something that we're looking at that you've heard mentioned is the opportunities to build a restoration economy. So we're bringing our lands and waters back to health while also creating jobs. We have over 500,000 unplugged, abandoned, or orphaned oil and gas wells in this region. Our work with Reimagine Appalachia shows that addressing that can create 15,000 jobs. When it comes to abandoned mine lands, we're looking at some research is saying near 25 billion of liabilities, and these are not just environmental; these are safety issues for communities. Landslides, mine blowouts that have immediate devastating impacts when those blowouts happen on our water quality. The president's plan stated that a $16 billion investment in environmental restoration and reclamation can create 250,000 jobs. And those jobs, because of the need here, I think we'll see more of those in West Virginia in this region. So what an opportunity. And I guess I would just wrap this up by anytime I get a chance to talk with an audience outside of my state, I ask for some deep reflection and the reality that basically our whole country has benefited from the sacrifices we've made in Appalachia to power this country for nearly a century now. And that when we talk about the need to transition energy and address the climate crisis, we also have to think about people. In fact, we need to put people at the center of this, especially places like West Virginia that are feeling the pain, that are bearing the brunt of these energy transitions that we're working through right now. And when we talk about Reimagine Appalachia, its blueprint, when we talk about a national jobs plan, to put our region at the center of that is essential from an equity standpoint, from a political standpoint, from just doing the right thing and making sure people are taken care of. I was really moved by hearing Gina McCarthy's comment recently about climate change and thinking of it, yes, as a planetary issue, and it's about saving the planet, but she reminded us it's also about saving people and putting people first. And that's why I'm so proud and encouraged to be part of this broad coalition that is talking about how we get that win-win-win together. And if we can get this right, if we can do this right in West Virginia, if we can get it right for Appalachia, we can get it right for this entire nation. So thanks again for the chance to be with you.
Thank you, Angie. And we're going to move to some questions that are starting to come in. I'm just going to kind of take them. Boy, there's a bunch of them all of a sudden. How do we ensure that the president's American Jobs Plan has the impact you all want to see for Appalachia? What's the advice that you're giving to them? And how do they authentically work with and listen to groups in the region? Who wants to field that one?
Jim, in terms of the good jobs, putting labor standards in there, passing the PRO Act, as I said, making sure there's Davis-Bacon language, prevailing wage, project labor agreements or responsible contractor language to make sure that you get the most highly qualified people. Look, these can be, dangerous jobs. As Angie mentioned, these orphan gas wells and oil wells, there's some real danger around that. And mines that have closed, they're not always safely maintained. So we need some skilled workers, and, our building trades professionals do some of that great work, as well as can train folks to do that great work. And as Bishop Dinkins mentioned, this has to be reaching all workers, regardless of race, and it's got to be open to everybody locally in Appalachia. And one thing I'll just add is, collective bargaining agreements are gender blind, color blind, and everything else. I mean, if you're a machinist one in a contract, whether you're a woman, black, white, male, transgender, whatever you are, that pay rate is the same regardless of what all those other things, whatever religion you are. That contract is colorblind and gender blind. So having strong collective bargaining agreements in place, I think, goes a long way towards lifting up workers in Appalachia.
Thanks, Rick. I mean, I would also say to that, the answer to the question, we were so encouraged to actually see the American Jobs Plan incorporate, as Rick had pointed out, many of the things. So they've been listening to this campaign and others working in the region as well. So we want to kind of keep that up. All right, I'm going to the next question. I knew we'd get into politics. And I got a feeling this one's coming toward Angie, but others as well. For those of us not in West Virginia, how do we get Senator Manchin to come out in favor of a robust infrastructure bill, even if it doesn't meet his bipartisan thresholds?
Well, I mean, looking at the components of the American Jobs Plan, it is right in line with things that Senator Manchin and Senator Capito have championed. Things like infrastructure, water infrastructure, broadband, reclamation, the things we've touched on. So, when I talk to my neighbors here about what this opportunity is about, I get encouraged that it's not about partisanship. It's about what we need to create a future for our kids. And I mean, that's what it comes down to, is like, how can we build a place where our kids don't have to leave the state and find jobs everywhere? And I think that transcends partisanship. Senator Manchin has shown a real talent for brokering bipartisan support. I'm confident he will make a sincere and deliberate effort to do that. I'm also confident he is not going to let this opportunity pass us by. There's too much at stake. There's too much need. And I would hope that our Republican representatives would see that as well. We're seeing on the ground now the American Rescue Act, the money coming to small communities, towns, and making a huge difference just to start getting back on our feet. Now it's about that transformational opportunity.
Anyone else want to weigh in on the politics? All right, we'll move to, this one's coming back to you, Rick. What percentage of the workforce is unionized now, and why is there an erosion of union jobs in past years, and how much of that still exists?
Well, about 12.5% of the American workforce is now organized. Is the high, I think, was, depending on the state, was around 35% back in the 50s. And, part of the reason has been companies have gotten sophisticated about beating unions. We haven't had any significant labor law reform to the positive since the National Labor Relations Act passed in 1935. The only two pieces of legislation that passed were the Taft-Hartley, which allowed for right to work, which Truman vetoed, but the Republicans overrode the veto. And then Lander and Griffith, which put all kinds of burdens on unions and reporting. So over time, and then of course you had President Reagan with the PATCO strike signaled employers that it's okay to take on unions and violate the law. Look, there's a chart out there. I wish I'd had it or knew how to screen share, but that shows with the decline of union membership, you can trace the decline of the middle class. The two are inextricably linked. And the reason that so much wealth is going to the top right now during the pandemic, there's nobody at the bargaining table fighting for workers' fair share of that newly created wealth. So we got a lot of work to do, and the forces are weighted heavily against us. They have billions of dollars to spend in anti-union campaigns, and as I mentioned earlier, they're not afraid to break. Unfortunately, they're willing to break the law to keep the union out. And we've got to pass the PRO Act. That's going to be the way to level the playing field for growth in the union movement, and to continue to organize. Never stop organizing, regardless what the law is.
Here's one related to the grid. two wealthy energy rich states, California, Texas, where they had high profile blackouts that affected poor Americans as much as wealthy ones. As coal power input into the electricity grid declined, how fragile is the grid in Appalachia? And how do we protect the most vulnerable from the blackouts? Anyone want to pick up on kind of what's the real challenge here with the grid?
I don't mean to dominate, but it looks like Hannah's trying to answer. Hannah, you're on mute.
Oh, go ahead, Rick. I'll pop up if at the end of your comments.
You know, and I periodically look at pjm.com, which tells our region what power sources we're using. And, you know, coal's in there, nukes, and gas. Mostly, you know, nukes and gas kind of compete for the same, for about 35%, and coal's anywhere from 25 to 30%. But what's not there yet is solar. Well, wind's starting to pick up. Solar's not a major source of energy, nor is hydroelectric. And, you know, we really need to think about how, and again, you know, how we create good energy jobs that take advantage of Pennsylvania's, you know, we're a net energy exporter here in PA. And, you know, we provide baseload energy to all kinds of states, New York included. So we have to make sure that we have a diverse energy portfolio that is going to make sure that if something happens, and that goes to, you know, part of the problem in Texas, well, the natural gas froze. There are all kinds of problems, right? They didn't weatherize. They tried to blame it on clean energy, but it was really their failure to spend money to protect their own grid and their own power sources. But, you know, when we're looking at new jobs, look, battery manufacturing, if you're going to have solar and wind become part of the base load, you've got to be able to store that energy so that it's on tap anytime you need it. Right now it's intermittent, right? Because we don't have the battery technology yet. And those could be great jobs for Appalachia, right? Battery production, to make sure that, because we know we got the wind on top of all those mountaintops. And we certainly periodically got the sunshine, and we got great potential for environmentally safe hydroelectric power, which they're coming up with all kinds of new ideas on how to make energy or hydroelectric more environmentally sound. So we got to take advantage of all the natural resources in Appalachia, but also the workers to build those batteries to make sure that we have other types of baseload energy.
Anna?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, you know, we know that the electric grid, as is true for so many of the basic utility services in Appalachia and across the nation in communities that have been left behind, is nowhere ready or able to meet the existing needs of the population that lives there. And it's certainly not ready to meet the challenges of a changing climate. So just in thinking about electrical delivery systems and how those are structured and increasing storm damage, we're not there. We're not ready. It is fragile. There's plenty of room for investment, plenty of room to get people out at work, getting that up to speed. And, you know, the additional factor is that those costs in Appalachia for energy are huge. It is, I'm not sure we elevate that enough in the conversation, but the bills for heating and cooling and turning your stove on can be astronomical for lots of reasons, all kinds of reasons. And so the fragility isn't just in the delivery of these, it's not just in our sort of power production mix, it's also in sort of the equity when it comes to paying and affording these things. So there's so much room there to sort of correct some damage, do some justice, and really get an economy growing again. So I think that's a great question. And you know, there was a question on the share of the workforce that's unionized. I know for Ohio here, it's a little over 13%. That's up a little bit from 2019. But whenever people are asked, if they want a union, do they approve of unions? That's going to be the majority. That's upwards of 65% of respondents on those Gallup surveys, and that tends to be increasing. And so, whenever we think about why unions are eroding, it's not because the people who are working don't want a union. So that's why it's a critical piece of the Reimagine Appalachia project. And ultimately, in all of these questions, if we're thinking about, how does a region have control of its future? How do we bring democracy into how we are making public investments? Collective bargaining also has it's central to the heart of this thing. You can't have democracy. You can't have a control over your community. You can't have a voice if you don't have a voice on your job. And so that's why so much of Reimagine Appalachia is about the working people, while it's about the environment, while it's about the communities that are going to be on the receiving end of these policies, hopefully.
That's great. Let me shift to something I think everybody can reflect on here. And there's a lot of excitement and energy about reestablishing the Civilian Conservation Corps in America. And we're already starting to see bills coming out, and I think we're going to see more. And of course, it's a plank in reimagining. What is the promise there? What would the region get from a Civilian Conservation Corps? If you just kind of want to go around the horn here.
I'll kick things off since I just got on my soapbox a little bit. I'll step back on it. The first word that came to my mind with that question, Jim, was hope. Is that it provides hope. And then looking through some of the questions in the chat, someone asked about the role of infrastructure investment in attracting people to a region whose economy has long suffered from population loss. And that is part of the hope. And that's part of what I think a CCC program that really is grounded in equity, that provides pathways out of addiction, pathways out of the criminal justice system into high quality, meaningful, valued work. That's what it's about for me, is hope. It's to have a place and have a community where young people feel that they can stay, and a place for people who aren't there might find hope and find themselves and see themselves, building a future.
Well, I'll chime in. Never wanted to be shy about and I can't really add to what Hannah said. It really is about hope, and Senator Casey and others have really led the way on reestablishing the Corps and just giving folks the opportunity to be outside and, be in different parts of the state. As Bishop Dinkins said, we got to rethink what is rural. And, just hope is, I just echo what Hannah said. It is about hope.
I think it's about hope, but I also think it's about vision. When we talk, we're talking about reimagine. So it's about vision as well. One of the things that really for the Civilian Conservation Corps, for me, the importance of it is I've done a lot of work around criminal justice reform, and the Civilian Conservation Corps, as Hannah spoke a little bit about, is that it allows opportunities for formerly incarcerated persons who are generally incarcerated outside of where they live and may not have opportunities to move any place else to be able to reestablish where they live. It also, it brings people into this space again, as Rick mentioned, union jobs. It offers an opportunity for people to not only reimagine where they live, but they can reimagine how they live. They can reimagine how they want to live. They can reimagine their life. Because to me, the Civilian Conservation Corps is providing access and opportunities. And then there's this form of equity, because a lot of times we just speak of one without giving people the opportunity to you can have access. But this is saying we're moving beyond just access. We're creating opportunities, and connected to that are outcomes. And so that helps that helps people to build a pathway, an economic pathway for economic mobility and stability and community sustainability.
All of those things, and I know for me, it's also about instilling and cultivating a spirit of public service and the ability to really give leave a legacy in one's community. That's what brought me to West Virginia 27 years ago, was an AmeriCorps opportunity where I got to learn. I got mentored, and I also got invested, and as you can probably tell. And when I think about what the CCC means in West Virginia from its first round, is anywhere you go around our state park system, which I encourage you all to visit, you're going to see a CC built cabin or a picnic shelter. It's become like the fabric of our wild and wonderful, our outdoor recreation economy. All of that is on the upswing in West Virginia, and here's a way that we can even prop it up and boost it up more while helping young people find their career path.
Great. All right, I think we're going to do one more. Boy, this is hard to pull these things out. Let's try this. How does Appalachia attract the 21st century jobs such as battery storage, electric vehicle charging stations, job tied to science and technology, with all the competition that's out there? What does it take?
It's going to take a skilled workforce, which is, President Biden has put in lots of money for workforce development and training. It's going to take the science and the technology. And, in Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, and Kentucky, we have some of the best universities out there that are dealing with these issues. And, you got Carnegie Mellon, you got Pitt, you got, University of West Virginia, Bowling Green, I think, of Southeast PA and or Southeast Ohio, and of course University of Kentucky and Lexington, and or Louisville, all kinds of great opportunities. And those folks are constantly innovating. I mean, there's a reason that Google and Apple and a lot of automated vehicle folks have come to Pittsburgh, which is in Appalachia. But it's because of the innovation. And I think that innovation, you could almost create an innovation corridor around Appalachia, right? We've got incredibly, and I know they're trying to, the old chemical plants and stuff down in West Virginia, which need to be, that's an industry that needs to be cleaner. But I think there are real opportunities, and just the science and technology. We got the workforce. We might need some training. I think we do need training for these highly skilled jobs. But I think you just got to leverage the academic resources plus the worker resources you have. And look, the natural resources. Appalachia's got incredible natural resources that can be put to work in growing the region.
Amen to all that. We're at the end of our time. I want to thank everybody, but I want to turn it back to George for some closing remarks.
Well, thank you to all the panelists for taking the time to share your perspectives in this very timely and productive conversation. And to those who are listening, I think the interest is indicated by the number of questions and comments, some of which we got to and some of which we didn't. So hopefully we will continue this conversation through a growing debate about how to structure the administration, the congressional new infrastructure investment program. I want to thank Dana Kuhnlein, Jessica Arians, Colin Lauderdale, Kelsey Foran, Maria Castillo, and Zainab Willonen, and the Atlanta Council events team for their work in organizing this event. If you'd like to re-watch the panel or share the stream with a colleague, you can find it, the recording, on the Atlanta Council website or our YouTube channel. So thanks again for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.